when the government issued the debt, the Bank of England didn't buy it directly from them at auction. They let the banks buy it, and then they'd buy it from the banks the day after. But they announced that they would do that, so it was basically just covering their tracks. But the problem with that, and I warned back then, and I was still working in the city, that it would end up in hyperinflation, that it was debt monetization, and people kept saying, no, it's going to create deflation, you know? And there's still people out there saying it's going to create deflation. How's that going? Thursday, September 11th, 2025, Moneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Well, I know there's loads to talk about, what's going on in the US, but be as it may, today we're going to look at a central banker that's actually coming out and warning about the debt load of the UK, a former central banker. And to me, it's just ridiculous this guy is coming out like this. He's the guy who actually kicked off the major increase in the government's debt back in 2009. So we're going to look at that. He's a guy, believe it or not, who printed hundreds of billions of pounds of basically fake money out of thin air. But before we look into that, though, a few things. Of course, the first one is what happened yesterday to Charlie Kirk. Really bad event, of course. Feel really sorry for his family. And I posted on Next that, well, I can look at what I said on X. Makes it easier. Where is it? Yeah, I posted what happened in Utah is a symptom of the fourth turning. And we can expect more turbulence, violence, and chaos for at least another 5 years, according to Neil Howe. Who's Neil Howe? Well, he's the author of this book, The Fourth Turning. And he was also the author of a book with another gentleman called William Strauss, who has passed away, a book called The Fourth Turning. And Strauss and Howe, they develop a theory, a study of generational theory. And they went back in U.S. history, and also they had to go back into English history. And they basically said that every 80 to 100 years, which is a seculum, things erupt. There are major crises. The first one they looked at was the American Revolution from around 65 to 1783 or thereabouts. Usually it takes they have there's the spring, the summer, the autumn, and winter. So it's 80 to 100 years, all those 4 seasons. So it usually takes 20 years or more for each season. And the next crisis, of course, after the American Revolution was the Civil War. So if you do the maths, 1780 plus 80, you get 1860. And then you add 80 to that, 1860, you get the 1940s, World War II. And you add 80 to 100 to that, you get the 2020s. A client of mine, actually, when I worked in the city of London as a futures and options broker, he recommended The Fourth Turning to me, and I read that book. Recently, Neil Howe published this one. I think it was last year. The Fourth Turning is here, and that we are in the winter. And in my post on X, I put a copy of what is said in the book here. It says, today, right on schedule, the United States finds itself engulfed in yet another fourth turning. And so Neil Howe has returned with an extraordinary new prediction. What we see all around us, the polarization, growing threats of civil conflict and global war, will culminate in the early 2030s in a climax that poses great danger and yet also holds great promise. Perhaps even ushering in America's next golden age. Every generation alive today will play a vital role in determining how this crisis is resolved for good or ill. So I'm not trying to judge anything. I'm just trying to say that unfortunately things seem to me that they're going to get even more chaotic in the United States. Not that they're not chaotic here in the UK either. It could spread here to the UK. After all, our cycles are very similar, the UK and the US. And so that's what I'm going to say about that, about what happened yesterday. And talking about my client who recommended me the first book, the original book, he's the same client who on September 11th, 2001, barked through the direct line that we kept on speakers in the office, a huge, pretty big order in the futures market. And he was very loud. And he was a guy that was usually very quiet. He would just say, Mario, pick up, please. And I'd pick up and he'd give me an order very calmly. But this time I knew there was something wrong. He said, buy me 500 Euro marks. And at the time we still traded Deutschmarks. And that's the 3-month interest rate contract. And I knew there was something wrong when he did that. And that was on 9/11. And of course, he was in New York, right near Lower Manhattan. He was in Lower Manhattan, his office. So he saw what happened on that day. So just wanted to put that out there. The other thing I wanted to say, and this doesn't happen very often, and I was really happy to make a new acquaintance of all places. At my golf club the other day, I was having breakfast before playing, and this gentleman came up and introduced himself to me, and I thought, you've got the wrong person. He was with another group of people, and he said, I watch you every day. And we had a really nice chat. So he's one of the followers of the channel, and it doesn't happen very often that I meet someone who watches my videos or follows the channel in the outside world, and that was really great. And I can tell you he was such a nice gentleman that I've got his WhatsApp number, and hopefully we'll keep in touch and maybe even play golf one day together. So yeah, we're going to look at the markets later on and the economic statistics. But now back to the central banker who's warning about too much debt. Of course, he's retired, right? And to me, it's akin to criminals, bank robbers, warning the banking establishment that robberies could get a lot worse, that they need to watch out. That's the analogy. A central banker, very concerned, as it says here in the Telegraph article. UK should be very concerned about debt levels, says, well, he's a lord now. He did so well, right? He created so much. He helped the government create so much debt that he was knighted and made into a lord. So we have to call him Sir Mervyn King, right? That's the thing about these titles, knighthoods. Maybe back in the day, they were honorable people, people fighting for real and like fighting evil. But here we've got someone who has no like moral compass, no ethical compass really. The guy who basically, and I can't really call him a counterfeiter, but he was as good as a counterfeiter because he created 375 billion pounds out of thin air. And he will argue I didn't monetize the debt because we bought it in the secondary market, but you might as well just have done it. I mean, it was just a way to, and by that I mean when the government issued the debt, the Bank of England didn't buy it directly from them at auction. They let the banks buy it, and then they'd buy it from the banks the day after. But they announced that they would do that, so it was basically just covering their tracks. But the problem with that, and I warned back then, and I was still working in the city, that it would end up in hyperinflation, that it was debt monetization, and people kept saying, no, it's going to create deflation, and there's still people out there saying it's going to create deflation. How's that going for you? I remember a cup of coffee used to cost £2 at Starbucks. Now it's like 4 or 5. How's that going, right? But I did a little bit of investigation here, and I found he's the king of QE. He kicked it off here in the UK, and that was in March 2009. He kicked it off with 75 billion. That was the initial amount of gilt purchases, and then he increased the total to 125. So he added 50 in May 2009. In August 2009, he added another 50. Really easy, isn't it, when you can type 50 billion? And now he's warning that the UK has a debt problem. Actually, I've got a book that he wrote a few years ago, The Alchemy of Finance, and I've actually contacted his secretary for an interview, but he's never had the time to come and talk to me. I wonder why. I probably asked him some very difficult questions. He'll probably go on mainstream media a lot. I've seen him, and they never ask him these difficult questions because he's the guy who started it out. But yeah, so by the time, he left office in June 2013. He took over in 2003. So he was the guy really in charge of the hen house, so to speak, all throughout that period where the housing bubble was created, the 2008 crisis was a thing, and QE was a thing, right? So by the time he left office in 2013, the QE had increased to 375 billion pounds. So thanks to him, the government was able to indebt itself. And you might ask, well, they needed to do that. Everything was collapsing. Well, I remember at the time saying, to colleagues, they need to let it all collapse, let the banks fail. But of course, they didn't let that happen because the banks have a lot of political power, and the politicians, they're clueless. Gordon Brown, Alistair Darling, and George Osborne, they're clueless. They will do what the bankers tell them. And yes, he kicked it off. And what's worse is that the amount of QE that Mr. or Lord King did was, it reached 25% of GDP. So can you imagine that one man controlling that much of the economy? It's just outrageous. And now, just go back to the article, He says Britain should be very concerned about the mounting level of the national debt. Lord King has warned. The former governor of the Bank of England said the UK is not in a comfortable position in the wake of the financial crisis and the pandemic. Yeah, so not blaming himself, he's blaming events. He's not blaming the reaction of the central bankers, of himself. And it goes to show that this question of independence, and it's a big question these days vis-a-vis Trump and the Fed, is just a BS, because when push comes to shove, the central bankers, they will do what it takes to save the government, and to make sure that the government debt market doesn't collapse, because their whole fiat currency scheme is backed on this system going, on the debt going. And I looked further, because after Mervyn King, we had Mark Carney, who's the current Prime Minister of Canada, unfortunately for my Canadian viewers. And he actually only added, I think, 60 billion of QE actually. And he was there from 2013 to 2020. And he added the 60 billion after the Brexit referendum. So we got up to 435 billion, and we were at 22% of GDP. And then came the granddaddy. It wasn't that much more than Mr. King. I'm going to call him Mr. King. Don't care about the titles. He doesn't deserve it anyway. And he's too much of a wimp to come on my channel to tell me why he started the QE, right? The last few years has been warning about inflation. Well, he's the one who kicked it all off, as I've said before. But yeah, Mr. Bailey, the current governor who took over in 2020, during that incident, and I'm not going to go over it too much, in the early 2020s, guess how much he added to QE? Well, in March 2020, he added 200 billion. In June, he added 100 billion, June 2020. And in November, he added another 150 billion, and we got up to almost 900 billion in total QE since 2009. And the peak at the time in terms of GDP, percentage of GDP, was 40 to 43%. And to think that you're not going to have a currency collapse and rising prices, which they call inflation, which is wrong. The inflation was created by these three central bankers. I mean, when you create almost 45% of the economy, when you create funny money that represents 45% of the economy, and you shut down the economy, you inject people with stuff that makes them really ill years after, of course the economy is going to be in the dumps, and that's what we're getting now. So it's really rich coming from Lord King, warning us about all this situation and the debt. That's what I wanted to tell you. Yes, I do want to expose him, and all the other central bankers, but the most important thing of my message today is that you understand what really happened, and you don't really let these guys off because they're just like it was because of the financial crisis and the pandemic, but no, it was because of their reactions to it. And they'll say, oh, we had to do it. No, you didn't have to do it. There was another way. Iceland showed us that you could let the banks collapse. You reorganize the banks. You jail the bankers. You abolish derivatives. And even COVID showed us that you didn't have to stop and lock down the economy because Sweden didn't do it, right? So, yeah, it gets me really, well, not angry because it's not a good emotion, but it's gets me annoyed. And it's one of the reasons I make these videos, to try to wake up the public about this, because you're not going to get the mainstream media asking the king of QE real tough questions. And by the way, I don't really recommend his book, The Alchemy of Finance. I have it on the shelf, but don't waste your rapidly depreciating currency to buy one. So let's look at the markets. Well, we had PPI numbers yesterday, and they were lower than expected. They dropped month on month, like 0.1 or 0.3. I'm not sure the exact number, the core and the headline number. The annual numbers were still above 2%, but they were lower than expected. And you get like a post from President Trump in the White House: there's no inflation, cut rates, Jay Powell, which is complete rubbish. I'm sorry to say, either Mr. Trump is ignorant of what inflation really is, or he's just being political and propagandizing statistics, because we know, and we know how the cost of living is rising in the US. And anyway, inflation is the creation of currency and credit, just like we saw Lord King and his colleagues at the Bank of England, the £1 trillion almost that they created from 2009 to 2020. That's what's causing all the rising prices. We're paying for it now. So, and the same thing happened in the US, of course, with their QE, and they're paying for it now. And there's no amount of tinkering with the statistics that's going to make people believe that there's no inflation. So today we got the CPI number, and I expect the CPI numbers to be weaker than expected as well. We know that President Trump will sack you, will fire you if you don't publish the right statistics, right? So I'm sure the people at the BLS have got the message now. Bring out really low inflation numbers so Mr. Powell can print even more, because that's what's going to happen. And that's why gold and silver are doing what they're doing, and they're going to continue to do what they're doing until you can't get any more gold and silver with the dollar, the pound, the euro, the yuan. All these currencies are going to crash, as I've said many times. But anyway, we're going to watch the CPI today. Yeah, I saw the bond market, the treasury market is rallying because of that, because there's no inflation, right? But don't be fooled. What's going to happen? Yeah, in nominal terms, bond prices might rally, but in terms of real value like gold and silver, it's going to drop. And even in nominal terms, I expect prices to drop massively in the coming years. I expect double-digit yields and interest rates throughout the West, the US included. So there you go. Right now, as I speak, it's almost 8 a.m. London time. We've got gold at 36.35. It's down about $4. The high's been 36.50. The low 36.22. Silver still holding on above 41. And I think silver, I've been hearing from the specialists like bullion dealers like Bob Coleman that it's almost impossible for the bullion banks to lease silver in London so they can short the SLV ETF. Yeah, it's getting really hard. And I've heard as well that the bullion banks have been covering a lot of their COMEX short, and their short positions are shrinking, which is very bullish because they're usually really short, and especially at these high prices, when silver gets to really record highs, they pile on the shorts. But now they're running for the hills, they're covering their shorts. So that's how I see things. And with that, I'm going to wish you all a very good day. Take care. Bye.